Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Okay. Uh, for most of you, it's actually this evening. For me, it's this morning. I will try to give a talk on. Actually, I haven't figured it out yet. So I'll probably start off with actually something very interesting, some very important is called basic right view or samadhi. But this is on a level of convention. There is there is some information. It's in the suttas, but it's in different places. It's actually the way to go to heaven. It's actually a bit unknown to a lot of people. And actually the way to go into different heavens is also unknown to most people. So I'm talk about this a bit. Sorry, it's the very first time I've ever done a Zoom, so it's a bit strange. I'm actually talking to a picture of a kitten. So sorry, that will actually also sound strange. I'll explain that later. But okay, so basic right view. So the way to get into heaven is actually if you're following the suttas, very traditional. There are different ways where people actually get into heaven, and in some cases, it only states the thing which they did, which actually led them to go to heaven. But in terms of trying to go to heaven in a more or the heavenly realms in a more certain way, there's actually three basic things that are very important to consider. If you have these three basic things, then generally your going to heavenly realms is basically assured. So basically, these three things are dana, which is giving or generosity. Second one is sila, or virtue, or goodness, or kindness. This is generally the 5 precepts or 8 precepts. And the last is bhavana. So bhavana is actually, it's literally development, but in most cases it means it's referring to practice. So there's many different types of practice, such as the most important two of a practice or a bhavana are generally going to be sitting meditation and walking meditation. But there's also very important ones like chanting, and within sitting meditation, there's also different types. There's reflecting. So there's considering, there's contemplating, there's also stilling the mind. So this is the part of bhavana. So this is basically, there are two results from practicing these two things. The lesser result of practicing these two things to a large extent is that you at least go to the heavenly realms, whereby which you can continue to practice further, hopefully. And there is a bit of a danger in the heavenly realms in that they are quite pleasant. It's said in the heavenly realms that the eye is always in happiness, and the ear is always in happiness, and the nose, everything is basically pleasant and wonderful. So because of this, it actually happens that many of the devas become a bit heedless and don't practice and don't continue to make merit. So this is a bit of a danger. So, but in general, the heavenly realms for someone who has a strong tendency, like say, for example, someone has been, has offered a lot, been very generous in this life. So if you have enough strong tendency in this way, then this will continue on. And for someone who keeps 5 precepts or 8 precepts, you have done that enough in this life, then it will actually lead you to heaven, and it will also kind of stick with you as a karmic tendency. So that's kind of a bit how karma works. It's the whatever the mind frequently inclines to, it generally goes in that direction. So and the also too practice. This is a very important thing, because for someone who inclines in training the mind, then the mind can actually be trained until it becomes more calm and more bright and high. So this idea of basically not only a mind which is bright, but which is kind, and which is also still and free, and which is also has loving kindness for others, but at the same time is able to let go. So basically, in developing basic right view, so long as one, as a Buddhist, as one who has faith in the teachings of the Buddha, if you have faith in these 3 things, then you will have one of 2 results. The first will be going to heaven, depending on how much you do them, the different heavenly realms. And the other one is to attain, to become enlightened. So this is the more indirect route. So but it's a good one. So the most direct route to become attained is sila. And in this case, it's usually 227 precepts for a monk, or 311, I believe, for a bhikshuni, or for a samanera or samaneri, it is 10. And for a pakao or someone training, it's 8. Or actually, for someone who is practicing them, you can also use this on 5 precepts. So here 5 precepts is also enough. And then the second of these is actually samadhi. And so most of you probably know what samadhi is. If you are not familiar, samadhi is actually the mind when it is becoming collected or tranquil, but it's also becoming, say, for example, if I could explain it a bit like this, the mind is actually traditionally flowing outwards and going in different directions. Like, say, for example, even in seeing or hearing. So the mind actually tends to going from seeing to hearing to thinking to reflecting, and then back to seeing and thinking. So it tends to jump a lot. So because of this, the energy of the mind it tends to go outward, and it tends to always be having this kind of asava, which is called outward flow. And then because of this, the energy of the mind is wasted. So the opposite of this is actually samadhi. Samadhi is when the mind is coming to one place, which is wholesome, and it pools there. So this collecting of the mind and staying in one place, this is what is generally described as samadhi. But it also has this beautiful connotation. It's based also in the word like samatha, which is like to be calm or still or tranquil. So in this, it's actually good to draw upon a simile. It's similar to a lake, which has no fish or any commotion in it. There's no wind or anything. So it's this crystal clear lake. And so it has this quality of being both incredibly clear and incredibly still. So, but also too, it has it's alive, it's living, it's not dead, if that makes any sense. So this is the idea of samatha or samadhi. So this is the second quality. And then the third quality is panya. So panya is generally translated as wisdom or discernment. So this is generally associated with the 3 characteristics. So not always. Of course, there's an incredible range of panya, of wisdom. But in generally, the basic right view is generally attached to understanding the 3 characteristics as they truly are. So the 3 characteristics are impermanence or anicca, or it can mean like the lack of permanence or the lack of constancy. So impermanent or inconstant is another translation. So, and this is actually an interesting word in Pali because it's basically, there's a lot of Pali terms which actually don't translate perfectly into English. So this is the lack of permanence or the lack of being stable or the lack of being eternal. So this is generally getting in the area of anicca. So it can also mean changing. It can also mean being becoming otherwise. So this is anicca. And then you have dukkha. And then dukkha is an incredibly difficult word to translate. And specifically because it has quite a huge range of meanings. Like say, for example, even in this, like say, for example, the most classic translation of dukkha is actually suffering, which is correct. But actually in the suttas, there's a sutta where the Buddha is actually speaking of jhana. And he's actually speaking of very high jhana. So it's actually jhana is like an absorbed state. So it's a very high level of a very deep level of meditation, where the mind is incredibly collected, incredibly pooled, and it's actually purified. It's basically in a state of very high state of happiness and freedom. And the Buddha actually includes this state into the definition of what he calls dukkha. And the reason the Buddha, well, not being the Buddha, of course, but the reason the Buddha, I believe, defines it this way is because the Buddha also says that even this state is impermanent, and even this state is unstable, and even this state is it's not an eternal refuge. So in this sense, in that it's impermanent, it is also, and this way you could almost call it the lack of true happiness. So this is not the definition of the word dukkha, but it is an aspect of the term dukkha. So it can be very coarse suffering. It can be incredible pain or difficulty. It can be sorrow, limitation. All of these things are dukkha. But it can even be an incredibly high state of happiness, which is impermanent. So, and it also infers how to say, the lack of being satisfying. So you can call it the lack of being satisfying, or you can call it unsatisfying, or you can also call it unsatiating. So in terms of dukkha, it's quite good to reflect on it as how it pertains to impermanence, the first characteristic. So say, for example, if you, in the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, the characteristic of non-self, the Buddha generally starts off by asking about the body. And he asks the monks, is the body permanent or impermanent? And then the monks answer that the body is impermanent. And then the Buddha then goes to speak, well, that which is impermanent, is it sukha or dukkha? So this actually gets tricky on how you translate sukha or dukkha. Sukha is generally translated as happiness, but it can also in some ways be translated as true happiness. And then dukkha, again, here it can be translated as suffering, or it can also be translated as unsatisfying or unsatiating, or even the lack of true happiness. So it has an incredibly high range in the terms dukkha, the term of dukkha. So this unfortunately makes it very hard to translate into English. And you'll kind of notice I probably spent maybe 5 minutes trying to explain dukkha. So, and that actually, it's so just kind of keep in mind, it's an incredible range. It's not just one thing. It's not only suffering, and it's not only the characteristic of being unsatisfying. It's actually all of these things. So it can be even very high level of happiness, which in Pali would also be sukha, but it's because this sukha is impermanent. It's also by definition dukkha, because it's not true happiness, if that makes any sense. So I'm afraid your faces are too small, so I have no idea if any of you Yeah, it's a bit tricky to see. So forgive me. Okay, so hopefully that makes some sense. Okay, and also the third characteristic is anatta, or not self. So this can also be translated as the lack of permanent self. So in that sense, say for example, sometimes if we think of self as being a very abstract thing, so but in terms of investigating, it can be much easier in terms of looking at the three characteristics to actually look in a very, usually the body is easier to start with. So basically, if you consider the body, if the body is permanent or impermanent, then you can basically see through understanding and through looking at basically the way the world works that all bodies are impermanent. And then that which is impermanent, is it true happiness or is it dukkha? Is it suffering or unsatisfying, unsatiating, or the lack of true happiness? And in this sense, it's more truly, actually, it's dukkha. So the body can never actually be anything which is impermanent, can never be true happiness, or cannot be lasting happiness. So in this sense, it's dukkha. It's more easy to see in this way in relationship to the first characteristic, impermanence. And that which is impermanent, you can also carry this first characteristic into the third, or you can also go 1, 2, 3. So you can say that which is impermanent is also suffering or unsatisfying, unsatiating, or the lack of true happiness. And then you can also say that which is impermanent, can it be a permanent self? So obviously in its very definition, if it is impermanent, it cannot be a permanent self. And also using mere intelligence, or ideally some level of wisdom and hopefully mindfulness, when you reflect, is it possible that that which is impermanent can either be a permanent self or that it can belong to a permanent self? And in the sense that anything which is impermanent, it has to cease. And so in its ceasing, it is also unownable. So this is actually a very important connection to make in the mind and to reflect on this often. So basically in terms of basic right view, if you try to reflect on the three characteristics often, then this will hopefully help you to grow closer to basically what's called Dhamma, which is truth or reality or things as they truly are. And so the three characteristics are basically almost like a summary, helping you to see truth. So unfortunately in the world, most people see the opposite. Most people see permanence. Most people see the body as permanent. And most people see others' bodies as permanent. So this is actually wrong view. And with wrong view, you have, unfortunately, you have suffering and you have attachment. And it's basically delusion. And when you have delusion or ignorance, then the result will also always be further suffering. And then especially delusion, but also ignorance. Both of these are very powerful prisons. So most people, because they are trapped in this prison, will never see reality or will never awaken. So in summary, if you are practicing either the first path, which is dana, sila, and bhavana, or giving, precepts, virtue, goodness, second one, and the third one is development or cultivation or practice. Sorry, you have to forgive me because there's a lot of polyterms which actually have like 3 or 4 definitions. So please forgive me for defining the same word many different ways. So this is the first path, which is giving, keeping precepts, and practice in summary. And the second path, which is the more direct path, is virtue, like sila, in this case, either ordaining as a monk or a nun, or as a Mechi, or Samaner or Samaneri, or as a Pakao. There's many different ways to ordain. And then, but basically in this one, it kind of has the idea of completely offering one's life to this. It's considered a higher level of virtue. And the second uh, characteristic, or the second factor, would be the samadhi, where the mind is becoming tranquil and clear, but also developing insight. And it's also too, just speak on this very briefly. The quality, say for example, if you draw the simile of a lake which is clear and which is still, so there's this, it has this kind of, it's not only a double quality, it's many qualities of a lake, of course. So say for example, because of the stillness, there's clarity. So say for example, if you have many fish, and these fish are fighting, and then there's also strong winds, and there's also many people going into the water and playing in the water. So this would actually mix up the sand and the dirt and the dust, and the water would become obviously very cloudy. And so this would last for a period of time, so long as this commotion or chaos would continue. And so, but if there was a period of stillness, then that which is most coarse or most heavy in the water would begin to settle down, and the water becomes slightly more clear. And then as there is more time passes, when there is more stillness, then the more refined things also settle down in the water. And then eventually the water will become more and more clear until it becomes crystal clear. So when the mind, when it trains to be still, there becomes a clarity. And also too, there's also a more amazing quality like this than this in the mind, and that the mind is actually radiant. It's bright. It's quite powerful. So as it is when there is this stillness and this clarity, and the radiance can actually penetrate. Let's say, for example, when there is a lake which is cloudy, then very strong sun cannot penetrate deeply into the water. So this is basically similar to how the mind works. So when the mind is chaotic, when it's cluttered, or when it's busy, it becomes cloudy. When it becomes cloudy, it's less clear. When it's less clear, you cannot see deeply into it. When you can't see deeply into it, you can't see reality, basically. So this is unfortunately how most people live, and it's unfortunately how most people die. So because of this, basically people will never know the meaning of life, basically. And in terms of, if you're Buddhist, you have two basic paths. You have the path of going to heaven, but also developing at the same time. And you have the second path, which is the most direct, which is the path of attaining or awakening. So that is my basic introductory talk. Oh, sorry. So now I'm actually going to switch a bit now. No, so you can you can keep recording. But basically, sorry, I'm going to change subject slightly. I'm also going to speak about and basically, sorry, I'm going to try to do it in a couple of minutes, depending on how long I speak. Try to do like a 5-minute meditation, if that's okay. So, but I'd like to kind of start this one by basically offering kind of an aid for practice or an aid for meditation. So basically, if you can reflect on 3 things roughly, then meditation tends to be easier. So the first thing is that the body is impermanent, and because the body is impermanent, sorry, this is actually kind of a question and answer thing, but it's but obviously you won't answer. But so basically, if something is impermanent, then can you keep it? So this is kind of something we reflect on just internally. And then the So the answer is, or roughly the answer is, no, you cannot keep anything which is impermanent. Anything which is impermanent, it will arise and then fade away and then cease. So say, for example, a body is born and then it will go through its lifetime and then it will eventually grow older and then pass away. So this is the beginning, the sustaining, the fading away, and then the ceasing. So in terms of a body, it's birth and aging, sickness, and death. So, but in terms of thought, it is the arising of a thought, the sustaining of a thought, which is usually quite short, the fading away, and then the ceasing. So it's quite similar. So you have this beginning, middle, fading, and then ending. So this is basic right view in terms of three characteristics. So it's very important to see. So if you can reflect on this, if is the body permanent or impermanent, then the body is actually impermanent. So I'm actually, because I can't hear you, I'm going to answer for you. So because the body is impermanent, can you keep it? Can you hold on to it? Anything which is impermanent, can you keep? Or anything which dies, anything which has died, can you keep it? And the answer is no, you cannot. And that which you cannot keep and you cannot hold on to, is it possible? Is it proper? Or is it possible to say, this is me, this is mine? And the answer is no. Or is it possible to say that this belongs to me? And the answer is actually no. So if something is impermanent and it ceases, it dies, and you can't hold on to it and you can't keep it, then what do you have to do? So this is actually one of the most important questions for someone who's practicing, is if you cannot hold on to something, if you cannot keep it, like the body, you cannot keep the body, you cannot hold on to it. You can't actually just decide that may my body live 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years. There's no such path. There are longer lasting bodies, but there is not really like a package where you get to live forever. So the nature of the body is that it's impermanent. Because it's impermanent, it has to die. Because it dies, you can't keep it and you can't hold on to it. So this brings one to a very important question, which is, if you cannot hold on to something, if you can't keep it, what do you have to do? And so this is actually in the practice of Buddhists, or by following the teachings of the Buddha, what you do is you let go. So this is why it's important to let go of the body. You let go of the body because it's impermanent, and it's dukkha, and because you can't hold on to it. And if you want to go on the other side, if you want to try to hold on to the body, and you think that you can figure out some way to keep a body forever, then you can try. But you'll probably find that you can't do it. So this brings to a very important question. If you cannot keep the body and you cannot hold on to the body, what do you have to do? You have to let go of the body. So this is a very important thing to reflect on before practicing, before meditating, is this body is impermanent. How can I keep it? And then if you reflect, actually, yes, it is impermanent. How can I keep it? I can't. So what do you have to do? You have to let go of the body. But the trick of this is that it's easy to say and hard to do. So this is why we practice a lot. We practice because of right view and to develop right view. So then, if you reflect further, thoughts or thinking, are thoughts permanent or impermanent? And the answer is that thoughts are impermanent. And then if you reflect thus, thinking or thoughts, if they are impermanent, then can you keep them? Can you hold them? Or can they belong to you? And after reflecting, hopefully you realize, you see that you cannot hold on to thoughts. You can't hold on to thoughts. Why? Because they're impermanent and they die and they cease. So if you see this many times, over and over again, hopefully with wisdom, with mindfulness, then your attachment to thinking will hopefully weaken and grow less. And your attachment to the body will also hopefully grow less. And also by extension, a lot of people have attachment to their own bodies, of course, but and also most people have attachment to other people's bodies. So just as one's own body is impermanent, so too all bodies are impermanent. So can you keep your own body? No, it has to die. Can you keep other people's bodies? No, you can't. They all have to die. So this is important to see truth or reality. So if it makes you comfortable or uncomfortable, that's also something to look at. Your thoughts. Or this thought. Is this thought permanent or impermanent? It's impermanent. If it's impermanent, it will cease. If it ceases, it ends, it dies. How can you keep it? You can't. And if you can't keep thought, what do you have to do? You have to let it go. So then, if you train in truth or reality, you take refuge in truth, you take refuge in reality, and you take refuge in truth and reality because it is a refuge, and you don't take refuge in other things because they're not a refuge. So truth is the thing which helps you to be free and happy. So, and this is how. You basically see the truth of the body, and you let go of your attachment to the body. And you see your attachment to other bodies, and you let go of that. And then you see attachment to your own thoughts, and you let go of your own thoughts. And you see your attachment to other people's thoughts, and you let go of those as well. So if you understand these two basic things, or these four basic things, all bodies are impermanent. You can't keep them, you have to let them go. And if you understand that, then meditation is easier. And if you understand that thoughts are impermanent, and they cease, they die, everyone. So then, but you have to look for yourself. You have to see over and over again. Are thoughts permanent or impermanent? Actually, they're impermanent. So then, but you have to see it. You have to see the arising, sustaining, fading away, and ceasing. Very important in terms of basically everything. But if you see it in terms of the body and thinking, that helps quite a bit. So then, also too, so I'm actually speaking a bit longer than I thought, but we'll see how it goes. So then, also like to now put in a third reflection before we meditate for a few minutes, even though I'm running out of time. So the third reflection is this, and this is actually not exactly taken out of the suttas or a particular quote, but it's almost a combination of different ideas which are in the suttas. And so it is, say for example, the suttas are incredibly extensive, and the teachings of the Buddha are perfect. But different people take different angles, which help them, because the Buddha is supremely enlightened. He can teach everyone and everything. And so, because of this, he taught perfect and complete Dhamma. But everyone will have to find which aspect of Dhamma works best for them. So one thing which I found helps quite a bit is to reflect quite often. If today were truly my last day of life, what would I do with it? And then if you think, but this is very important. Two things are very important for this type of contemplation. Number one, most important thing is actually sincerity. You really have to think sincerely and have to be a bit open-hearted or open-minded. And the other one is actually wisdom. Wisdom is very important. And without mindfulness, wisdom tends to be much weaker. So, but generally try to focus on sincerity and try to focus on developing wisdom if you reflect like this. So if you think, if today was truly my last day of life, what would I do with it? And then if you think in these terms, then this hopefully will bring you to uh, two reflections. And not everyone will be the same, but of course it's this is a reflection, not again, actually, for the first time. If you practice this one time, it won't really make sense. But if you practice it once a day or many times a day, it will make sense. But it does take time. So if you think, if today was truly my last day of life, what would I do with it? Then hopefully this helps you to consider two things. It helps you to consider what is most important in life. What is life for? Or what is the meaning of life? Or why are you born into this world? So this is number one. And then number two is, how do you do that? How do you do what's most important? How do you do what is most meaningful to you? And if you wish, there's another two things which kind of follow. You can also look at your life or look at your mind and see what is not important, or what is what you call tertiary, what is of not primary importance or secondary importance, but what is unimportant. So if you reflect thus, if you can see what you do which actually is not of great use, then you can actually reduce that. So for most people in the world, a lot of people in the world are quite concerned with money and with relationships and with power and with phones and with politics. So it's very good to reflect. If today was truly my last day of life, what would I do with it? So what is the meaning of my life? Am I really born into this world for money? Am I truly born into this world for power? Or am I truly born into this world for relationships? So it's good. So this is an idea that, and this has to be personal. It can't be taught. So the idea is hopefully you can reflect again hopefully with sincerity and with wisdom, and consider truly. So I'd actually like to sit for 5 minutes and basically try to give people the opportunity to consider these 3 points. Or if you wish, just 1 point. If you wish to just reflect, if today was truly my last day of life, what would I do with it? And okay, so I offer this as a contemplation. This is my incredibly long introduction to my guided meditation, my 5-minute. No, it's actually not guided meditation, it's quiet meditation. So for 5 minutes. So if you could just try to consider, if today was truly my last day of life, what would I do with it? And so now we will sit for 5 minutes. Okay. You can stop doing. Okay. Okay, sorry, I don't have an actual bell. So, but 5 minutes is up. It's like probably a bit more like 6 minutes. But I actually don't have I don't have an exact clock, but it's probably between 5 and 6 minutes. So I hope that was helpful. It's I'll just try to speak for maybe a few more minutes and then do Q&A, questions and answers. That's okay. How long does Q&A usually take? Take a while. Okay. Okay. All right. So forgive me. This is my first Zoom. Yeah. Okay. My first. Okay. So also just like to mention other things which are helpful in meditation. One thing which is very helpful in meditation is, of course, wisdom and mindfulness, of course. But in this sense, if one can reflect often on the sense, as I just spoke about, this body will die for sure, how can I keep it? And then if one can be honest with oneself and be sincere, and contemplate truly, and then to see that, like it's to realize that the body, yeah, it truly is impermanent. It's actually not and there's not actually much space for doubt, actually, because the amount of people who think that the body lasts forever are not very many. There's, most people still feel that their body is themselves, but they have never really made the connection between that the body has to die for sure. So, and the body, whatever is basically born, it has to die. So birth and death, they are connected. So then it's basically, yeah, what you call a package deal. So with birth, there's death, but there's also aging and sickness in between. Even in the high realms, there's a birth, aging, sickness, and death, but it's a bit more refined. In the low realms, it's more coarse. But basically, in every realm, in all states of existence, it's the same. It's a birth, an aging, a sickness, and a death. So basically, this is the reality of any birth or any body. So with any body, there is death. With any body, there's a cessation of that body, the ending. With anything created, it breaks apart. And with anything born, it dies. So then, being open to this is truth. This is reality of the body. So then if you admit to this truth, then you can practice much easier, be in the world much easier, and let go of the body much easier. And then also reflecting on the truth of thinking. Thinking is impermanent. Because it's impermanent, it arises, it dies. Because all thinking is impermanent, it dies for sure, it ends for sure. And how can I keep it? So then if you think like this, then you hopefully realize sincerely, or and on whatever level you can. So actually, thoughts really are truly impermanent, and anything which is impermanent, is it even possible to keep it? It's not possible. So even if you were incredibly clever, incredibly wealthy, incredibly powerful, incredibly influential, it doesn't matter. Your thoughts will always be impermanent. Other people's thoughts will always be impermanent. If you try to hold on to anything which is impermanent, do you cause yourself happiness or suffering? You cause yourself suffering. You cause yourself suffering because what you're doing is part of delusion. So attaching to thoughts are delusion. And attaching to the body is delusion. And attaching to other people's bodies is delusion. And attaching to other people's thoughts is delusion. So this is actually strange for the mind, if it's not, especially if it's not Buddhist, or if it hasn't heard the teachings of the Buddha. But for someone who looks at them sincerely, it is not too difficult to see, or even to understand with wisdom. Yes, the body really is impermanent. Yes, people really do die. Yes, thoughts do change. They do become otherwise. So anything which is impermanent, you can't keep it. Anything which is impermanent, you can't keep it. You have to let it go, actually. So then, and also two of you also reflect thus. If today was truly my last day of life, what would I do with it? Then this hopefully brings the mind back to, actually there's something which I did not mention, which please forgive me. Actually, one of the most powerful things on reflecting on the possibility of death, or the inevitability of death, is that death is actually reality. So one should be not afraid of reality or truth. And then, oh, hopefully this reflection should ideally bring one back to the present moment. Present moment is incredibly important in practice and incredibly central. So ideally reflecting on the impermanence of the body should help you to come back to the present moment. And reflecting on the impermanence of thought, even more so, should help you to come back into the present moment. And then if you have the present moment, if you're living in the present, then you have refuge. So the Buddha speaks of this as one fortunate attachment, incredibly powerful, present moment, should not be underestimated in any way. So, and in the present moment there's actually a stillness in the present moment. And in this present moment and in this stillness there's awareness there. So this is actually what Ajahn Chah, very great teacher, he used to call this awareness. He called this awareness, this is your real home. This is where you actually truly belong. This is actually, if it were, this is your seat or your throne or your house. This is where you should be all the time. So that's awareness. And the reason that awareness is a refuge and it's your home, your real home, is because everything else dies. Everything else changes. So because the body dies, you can't keep it forever. It's not truly a refuge. Thinking dies, it changes. It's not truly a refuge. But awareness, it is a refuge. And that's where the body can cease. It can cease in awareness. And that's where thoughts cease. They cease in awareness. So awareness in this sense is truly a refuge. And so this is also awareness, which is also mindfulness, sati in Pali. So it's this idea of being awake and alert and aware of what is happening. And awareness in just seeing it as, or appreciating it as one's true nature, as it were, if you wish. It's a way of speaking of it. And, or as one's home, one's true real home, or as one's refuge. So the only place where you can actually be safe in the world is actually awareness, as everything else will basically change and become otherwise. So if you take that on, then practicing becomes much easier and much more natural. So I hope that also too, forgive me for speaking, I'm actually speaking a bit longer than I was expecting to. Also to having loving kindness for awareness and developing loving kindness for awareness, because it's incredibly important. And developing loving kindness for oneself, incredibly important, but incredibly difficult for most Westerners. Not for all, but probably for about 99%. Westerners have a lot of difficulty developing loving kindness for themselves. So for this one, you really have to keep developing it over a long time, and it eventually works. Or develop it for others first. It's very, very good. Unfortunately, I don't have time to describe it yet, but at this time. But yeah, developing loving kindness, very important. And then this hopefully will also too, one of the most important things, if you cannot practice anything else, just try to, in a very kind and wise way, try to pull the mind back to present moment. If you can't practice anything else, just try to very gently and very, very, as it were, in a way of wisdom, to gently pull the mind back to present moment. And it will eventually go away. And so you very, again, gently pull the mind back to present moment, present moment. And then hopefully this will be leading to some level of stillness or some level of calmness and some level of presence, some level of awareness. So then if you can try to do this as best as you can and as much as you can, because everyone's different and most people will, basically all people will practice differently. So you just have to do the best you can. So for that, you have to use your intelligence and your wisdom to figure out how you can practice or how much you can practice. So that's kind of up to you. So if you try to reflect, if today was truly my last day of life, what would I do with it? And how much would I practice? So then this is why it's important to think sincerely. If today was truly my last day of life, would I be able to keep 5 precepts complete or not? And if you think in terms of one day, then actually keeping 5 precepts is actually easier if you think of just one day. And if you think, if today was truly my last day of life, how much would I practice? And then you would probably be able to practice more than you thought. So if you practice this sincerely. So well, this is a good thing to kind of reflect upon in the morning when you wake up, or just when you get some free time. So ideally, this is getting you to come back into the present moment, and also to get over your worry or difficulty. So okay, so now my apologies for speaking too long. I'd like to actually do just maybe a few minutes of questions and answers. So